And now, The Point proudly brings you Tall Tales with Senator Bob Klitzkie.
A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Even when we lose power, cannot be infringed. Okay, so welcome to Tall Tales. Here we are back after a long weekend. The real Joe Cruz and I came down with a serious case of withdrawal syndrome because we had to go so long without Tall Tales. But we're back on the air now, and we are happy. Right, real Joe Cruz?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, here we are. Big as life, twice as ugly. So, as is my usual custom, I have a little squib here on the first, as you were in the Second Amendment, that I got from an internet source called alternate.org. It's a little bit on the left side, and their headline is, "The Supreme Court is poised to extend gun rights at the worst possible time." Of course, for the left, the worst possible time is any time. And the article goes into some of the history of the Heller decision and Justice Stevens's dissent, and it's a nice scholarly article. But the punchline is that. Talking about the city of New York, you remember the New York case that's now before the Supreme Court, where New York had a city ordinance that if you could have a gun in your house, but you couldn't take it out of the city, and you could only take it to 6 approved firing ranges. When it got to the Supreme Court, New York repealed that law, hoping to make the case moot. And this article points out that when that argument was made, it didn't seem to get much traction with the justices. So the punchline comes out like this. Unfortunately, given New York's capitulation and the Supreme Court's right-wing orientation, the only real remaining question is the scope of NRA's inevitable victory. Let's hold down the cheering now until the case is actually decided. Even if the court reconsiders the city's request and enters a dismissal order, the NRA will walk away with a significant win, having forced the city to rescind one of the most stringent gun control laws in the country. On the other hand, a decision on the merits on constitutional grounds in the NRA's favor would reward the organization with an even bigger triumph, endangering gun control laws everywhere. What a horrible result that would be. A nation awash in firearms in the grip of Wuhan virus, and once again I have to make this announcement every day. The text I'm reading from actually says COVID-19 pandemic, but the Tall Tales rule is that we tend to call a spade. So it's the Wuhan virus. We call it the Wuhan virus, and we do it unapologetically. As a matter of fact, even Bill Maher, that famous left-wing commentator, agrees. Let's see if I can find that. Hang on just a second here. Now I'll come back to it later on, but I've got an article where Bill Maher, the famous lefty TV talk show host, has criticized those people on the left who take offense at calling the Wuhan virus or the China virus, when, of course, that's exactly what it is. So the punchline here in this column, a nation awash in firearms in the grip of Wuhan virus awaits the court's decision, which is expected by the end of June. Well, I suppose if I were to look at this objectively, which is something I try to do as seldom as possible, it's not being an objective world we live in, I would think that maybe the best possible time to have a firearm in your home right now is in these times of economic stress, where there's an awful lot of folks who are unemployed. And I don't know, I never bought into this, but there are those who say, you know, when people lose their jobs, they're going to go out and commit crimes to stay alive. Well, if that's the case, then this is probably the best possible time to buy a gun. Okay, so much for the Second Amendment. We plunge straight into the card from there, as you were. Boy, I've been gone so long I forgot the order of the program here. What comes next, Real Joe Cruz?
Zemi Ikutni, sir.
Zemi Ikutni. Zemi Ikutni, that's the time of the day when I go through the editorials of the two papers and look for mistakes. And when I find mistakes, I'm unmerciful in pointing out what the mistakes are and call your attention to them. I look for mistakes in usage of English and grammar, in the logic of the theories presented in the editorial, and general style of the editorial. And having done that, I compare one editorial with the other and determine which of the two is better. And I award the coveted blue star to the better of the editorials. And this, of course, is a highly prized reward. I've mentioned before that careers have been made and broken on the award of that coveted blue star. And back in the day when we could still move about freely, if you had stationed yourself on the sidewalk in front of either of the editorial boardrooms at award time, when the blue star was awarded, you could actually hear champagne corks popping in the boardroom of the prevailing newspaper. That kind of was in the days when the Daily News used to put out editorials every day. They don't do that anymore. Instead, the Daily News runs boilerplate from USA Today and from Gannett News Service. Today's no different. Today they've got Glenn Harlan Reynolds, a University of Tennessee law professor, the author of The New School, How the Information Age Will Save American Education from Itself. But, you know, it's a nice general theoretical article, but it doesn't have anything at all to do with the situation that we find ourselves in here on Guam. So I don't count it even as an editorial, because for Tall Tales purposes, the editorial has to address local issues, local people, local concerns. I turn then to the Post. Labor Department can do better for tens of thousands of displaced workers. It has never been in doubt that GovGuam workers qualify for federal programs under the Wuhan Virus Relief and Security Act, also known as the CARES Act. Now, since you have my explanation, you'll know that Wuhan virus doesn't fit into that acronym very well, but who cares about acronyms when we're concerned with being accurate? The CARES Act to help people in the labor force who lost their incomes or took drastic pay cuts because of the Wuhan virus-related shutdown of businesses and the tourist industry's pause. On March 29, the federal legislation became law. It was clear from the nation's capital, Guam workers are covered. And several days ago, the U.S. Department of Labor further released an extensive list of qualifications for displaced workers. The list is long, so there are a wide variety of eligibility criteria under which a worker would qualify. On Saturday, however, the administration statement made it seem like they just found out Guam workers are covered. It's kind of a slap the forehead moment, huh? On Saturday, as you were, many of the displaced workers have known for weeks they are covered. This has been covered in the Daily Post reports, in addition to Guam and Northern Mariana's members of Congress saying so. What the displaced workers want to know is, when will a program be established? They want to know whether they can file now. They want to know whether the Labor Department has done its part in moving as quickly as possible to get these programs established immediately. For many of the workers, 2 or 3 pay periods have passed since their paychecks stopped or were drastically cut. We're looking at online applications, of course, but not everyone has access to a computer, said Guam Labor Director David Dalisala. Dalisala said one of the requirements for the program is to submit a budget to the U.S. Department of Labor, but he needs to know how many applicants potentially will be allowed to receive aid in order to know how much to ask for. Congress has already provided this amount, $960 each week for the first 3 months, and then $330 weekly until the end of December 2020. Dalisala said his department estimates 38,000 people will apply for the benefits over the next several months. He anticipates a mix of people who lost their jobs and those whose hours at work were cut. The local labor department already has a baseline information project in its budget. Nearly 38,000 people are expected to apply. The law enacted 2 weeks ago established how much will be provided even for territories such as Guam that don't have a pre-existing unemployment insurance program. Why couldn't the Labor Department submit an estimated budget to get the programs moving along? Just submit an estimated budget. Why couldn't Dalisala do what Department of Rev Tax Director Daphne Shimizu did, which was provide an estimate to the federal government that then led to the approval of $134.8 million in economic impact tax rebates to individuals on Guam. Dalisala said he will be teleconferencing with his federal counterparts on Tuesday and said he's hoping to get a final amount for the pandemic unemployment assistance program soon afterward, if not on that day. Simply put, the displaced workers will have to wait longer because the local labor department could not move quickly. Maybe they got stuck in one of Governor Lou's checkpoints, at least figuratively, if not literally. It's easy for fully paid Guam labor officials and personnel to tell people, wait. But for those who have not had a paycheck for more than a month, it's disheartening to learn they will have to wait weeks from now to start the application process. GovGuam hasn't helped them yet, except for telling them to apply for federal assistance. Okay, well, that gets the Post another blue star. That takes the Post up to 188 to 57 for the Daily News. And kind of interesting, along the same lines, as I scanned the newspaper over the long weekend, I came across a couple of ads on the classified page. Plaque Construction is looking for laborers. Submit your resume to, and there's a website, there's a, as you were, an email address there, to Black. And also Pacific Rim Constructor is looking for laborers. So a laborer doesn't need to have any particular skill. He needs to be able to lift things and carry things and and follow instructions, etc. But there it is. If you're really in the crunch, couple of companies are at least hiring. Okay, so much for Demi Ekotny. Then from there we go on to the card. Usually the real Joe Cruz rings a bell when we go on to the card, but as we say in the government, yeah. So then we go on to the card. Very good, real Joe Cruz. I just mentioned that, as we say in the government of Guam, he just stepped out.
I had to check if there was aircon on. It's getting a little warm in here.
It is hot in here. So my experience is you call a government of Guam agency and you say, this is Robert Klitzkie. I'd like to speak to Joe Schmo. Okay, hold on, sir. Oh, sir, he just stepped out.
Or he's out in the field.
Well, that's even longer. he just stepped out means he came to work this morning, but we haven't seen him since then. He's out in the field means he hasn't even come to work.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. And I always get a kick out of you tell the person who answers the phone who you want to talk to, and then they ask you, they come back and ask you who you are. And when you tell them who you are, oh, I'm sorry, sir, he just stepped out, or I'm sorry, sir, he's out in the field, causing me to say, if my name were not Robert Klitzkie, would he be in the office? In other words, are you screening your calls and only putting through calls for people that you like? Anyhow, that's back in the day when, days when people at the government of Guam used to answer the phone. Okay, so I got it. This is what I've got on the card today. I've got a short one here: jobs versus unemployment, which I already did. Wuhan virus versus abortion. Helen Middlebrook versus Governor Lou Leon Guerrero, and then Lou versus consistency, which has several parts and is quite long and might take the whole program. But let me jump right in here. And this is our first Tall Tales after an extremely long... How long was this weekend? 2 weeks long, real Joe Cruz?
A little over 2 weeks, sir.
That's how long it seemed, didn't it?
Yes,
wow,
sir.
It's so long to go without any Tall Tales. So I got this, I got a poem, a limerick from the poet laureate of Tall Tales, and this is what he says. Our Bob and real Joe don't look sunny, and they're pale, and that sure isn't funny. But why are they wailing? Could it be they're ailing from a chocolate Wuhan bunny? That's the poet laureate of Tall Tales, Andrew. Okay, so let me go straight into the next item on the card, which is Wuhan virus versus abortion. And I'll just read the headline. That's good enough. Dozen New York abortion clinic closing, laying off employees. So, the Wuhan virus is pretty tough on all of us, but this has to be characterized as good news. Dozen New York abortion clinic closing, laying off employees. And then, of course, we have the battles in some of the states where the governor said, no elective surgery. We've got to conserve our surgical resources, so there'll be no more elective surgery. And then counted abortion as elective surgery, which, of course, is exactly it is. An abortion is not a surgical procedure to interdict a serious disease. It's not like removing a cancerous tumor or something like that. But, of course, the pro-abortion Democrats scream bloody murder on that. Well, it is essential. And, of course, we know why they're saying that it's essential. And, of course, they have to object. But the fact that their position is completely illogical unless you buy into their basic premise that it's okay to kill a child before it's born. Their basic premise makes no sense at all. So I count this item, dozen New York abortion clinics closing, laying off employees, as one of the few upsides of the coronavirus, as you were. Bite your tongue, Bob. The Wuhan virus epidemic. From there, I go to Helen Middlebrook versus Lou. And Helen is a columnist for the Post. And this is what Helen wrote in yesterday's Post. Yesterday was, as you were in today's Post, she wrote it. Yesterday was Resurrection Sunday. Did your church choir have an uplifting cantata declaring he is risen? Did you raise your voice with others in your church to praise God for his wonderful works? Did you even notice it was Resurrection Sunday, or that it was Sunday at all? Maybe not. Since the beginning of the present situation, churches on our island and throughout the country have been closed. And while pastors here are encouraging their congregations to abide by the wishes of authorities and are finding alternative ways to have services via streaming services, social media, and radio, congregations are not meeting together. Now, I got to stop here and comment on this one section. You can't have Mass with live streaming. You can't go to Mass with live streaming. You can't go to Mass by watching it on TV. If you're a Catholic, you know that when you go to Mass, you're eating the body of Christ and drinking Christ's blood. You can't do that by watching it on TV. Our bishop has stepped back from the governor's orders, and I have to say I think it's a little bit unfortunate, because I think we could have Mass at the same time that we are doing what is necessary to fight the Wuhan virus. And at this point, I'm going to make an announcement. We will no longer use the phrase social distancing on tall tales. That has now been removed from our vocabulary, right along with the third person they, which we only use to make fun of it, and using the word normalcy instead of normality, and talking about 12 p.m. being noon. So along those lines, we will not be talking about social distancing. We'll be talking about physical distancing, which is really what we want to do. We want to keep a 6-foot interval between ourselves and everybody else, with just a few exceptions. Okay, I'm going to take a little physical distance from the microphone here for a moment, and I'll be right back.
The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts of Guam Training.
Hi, I'm Jerry Roberts, and every day on The Ray Gibson Show, I get to comment on the incredibly diverse, fun, challenging, sometimes frustrating, often exciting, but always interesting world of work. I hope you'll be there with us.
You can find daily transcripts of The Extra Point at guamtraining.com. Tune in every weekday morning at 7:20 for The Extra Point with Jerry Roberts, brought to you by Guahan Insurance Services and First Hawaiian Bank on 93.3 The Point.
Guam is home to strong and resolved people. As an island, we regularly deal with the destructive forces of nature together. We at Security Title know that when the storm passes, our families and neighbors will join together to clear the debris, to barbecue whatever is thawing in our freezers, and get back to the business of wholeheartedly living our lives. As our island struggles with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, let us remember that this too shall pass.
Tossie is infected with COVID-19. She still goes out because she and her friends think it doesn't affect them. Tossie infects 3 friends. Each one infects 3 more. In 30 days, 244 people are infected, including someone's Nana. Most recover, but Nana dies. Reduce your social contact. If you only infect 1 person, in 30 days, the virus spreads to only 4 people. Stay home, stop the spread, save lives.
Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie is brought to you by Bank Pacific, banking on the Pacific for 65 years. And it's also brought to you by Horizon Properties. Call 646-7616 or 777-7792. You can also visit them at horizonpropertiesguam.com.
Now, more Tall Tales with Bob Klitzkie. Spitting truth like watermelon seeds at a summer picnic. Call now, 888-TALK, 888-8255.
Yeah, so going back to Mass, there is no substitute for going to Mass. Watching it on TV, live streaming it, it's not the same thing. And for a Catholic, going to Mass is everything. It's every Sunday. It goes all the way back to the Last Supper. I don't need to go into a long religious lecture here. Suffice it to say that for Catholics, it's everything, and it's unfortunate that our bishop was as pliable as he was, because the powers that be, our governor, has allowed supermarkets to stay open under certain circumstances. If a supermarket could stay open, then why couldn't a church stay open under the same rubric as the supermarket? In other words, the physical distance. And by the way, back to physical distance, we'll use that from now on. And the phrase social distancing will be used only in one circumstance, and that's between us and those on the left. I still recommend keeping a social distance from those of us who are right thinkers from those on the left. But physical distance is what we're talking about with the Wuhan virus. So if it's okay for a supermarket to stay open so long as various rules concerning physical distancing are concerned, then it has to be okay for churches, because I checked the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, and it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And I didn't find anything in here at all about supermarkets. So the free exercise of religion is one of your fundamental freedoms, and it should not be easily given up. The same way with just going to a church. There are people who like to go to a church by themselves and sit or kneel in the church and engage in prayer. And again, so long as they observe the requisite physical distancing, there's no reason to close the churches down. And it's, we're seeing some really bad things going on here. We're seeing a governor who wants to rule by decree, and she wants the parliament, talking in historical terms, to make it a crime to disobey any of her decrees. And she didn't disband Parliament, but she told Parliament not to meet. You remember that? And Tina didn't meet until Jim Moylan got out there and shamed her into meeting with his sign. And, one of the other things that tyrants like to do is they like to squash religion. In the Soviet Union, most of the churches were closed. Many of them were actually wrecked, took the wrecking ball to them. So here we are, churches closed, governor ruling by decree, the governor telling the legislature what its procedures can be. You remember that. These are not good signs. And as a general principle, one of the strongest counterpoints to a tyrannical governor is a group of the religious faithful. So I hope that we still have them out there. Okay, going back to Helen's column, she said, and while pastors are encouraging their congregations to abide by the wishes of the authorities and are finding alternative ways to have services via streaming services, social media, and radio, congregations are not meeting together. To me, this is the greatest tragedy and travesty of all. The right to worship, to the free exercise of one's religion is guaranteed in the first line of the very first amendment to the Constitution. Congress will make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Freedom of religion comes before everything, before freedom of speech, even before freedom of the press. Freedom of religion is at the very foundation of our country. The separatists who landed in Plymouth left England and after being persecuted for their beliefs had set sail for the New World for, quote, for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith, according to the Mayflower Compact. And while the First Amendment says Congress shall make the law, this freedom has been upheld when other lesser authorities have tried to restrict it. Despite all of this, the current Wuhan virus scare has led to closed churches all over the country and to the persecution of churches that have held services even within, I'm going to have to edit here, even within physical distancing recommendations. Members of a church in Mississippi were fined for participating in a drive-in service. They had parked outside the church and tuned into a short-range FM signal to hear the pastor inside. On Guam, our authorities have determined that, quote, all places of worship are not approved for operations, subject to closure and prohibition from on-site operations. That's the Public Health Guidance Memo 2020-05. There is no constitutional authority on the state or federal level that allows government to subjectively determine who and what is essential for private workers, including during a national health emergency. Jenna Ellis, a constitutional lawyer, wrote in The Federalist, states are issuing orders without providing complete criteria for how they're making these determinations. Constitutionally and biblically, the church is essential. You're absolutely, let's give Helen a big round of applause here. Yeah. Yeah, very good. Yeah. So then the next question, here comes a challenge now. The next question is this: what do we do about it? Okay, we are on tall tales, we talk about it, we protest. What I would like to see, and once again now, from time to time, I tell you some of the things I'd like to see. I'd like to see a government that operates efficiently and effectively within the rule of law to provide basic government services on a break-even basis. That's one of the things I like to see. Whether you like it or not, that's what I'd like to see. This is what I would like to see. I would like to see the church, the Catholic Church, bring suit to set aside this obvious anti-religious rule that the governor has promulgated. And until she does that, then we are, we don't have separation of church and state, which a lot of people like to get up on their soapbox on. Separation of church and state. The anti-religious ones mean, well, religious people shouldn't be talking about government. But it's really the other way around. Separation of church and state is to protect the church from the state. And if the church ever needed protection from the state, it's right now. So what I would like to see, Bishop Burns, if you're listening, I would like to see the church bring suit to set aside this draconian executive order. If not, I know you don't have a whole lot of money to spare for legal fees, but perhaps some of the faithful could do that on behalf of the church. Okay, so I've got Jimmy, and I've got also known as Sam. So I'm going to start out with Jimmy, and then I'm going to go to also known as Sam. Good afternoon, Jimmy. Hey, we got a whole choir of Jimmys today.
Not now.
Yeah, that's better, Jimmy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you read the Bible.
I do, Jimmy.
And you know the book of Leviticus?
I know it, yes. I can't say I'm an ace on it, but I know of it, yeah. Leviticus.
Leviticus. Yeah, it's got the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's got the commandments. You know, the first commandment in the book of Leviticus is thou shalt not gallivant.
Okay.
Take that.
Gallivanting is a serious sin, isn't it, Jimmy?
Thou shalt not gallivant in the book of Leviticus. Anyway, I'll talk to you later. I'll call back again with. Since you read the Bible, you probably also read Shakespeare.
Once in a while, Jimmy.
Could I give you a quote and a paraphrase?
Certainly.
Shakespeare said, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet." And then we could paraphrase it. What's in a name? That which we call a roadblock is a checkpoint and stinks just as bad. Okay, I'll go. Bye. Bye-bye.
Classic Jimmy this afternoon. Wow, right after a long weekend, we come back to a dose of classic Jimmy. Thanks for calling, Jimmy. Okay, I've got another Sam, and then after another Sam, I've got, as you were, I've got also known as Sam, and then I've got another Joe. Okay, also known as Sam.
Hi, Tall Tales. Good afternoon.
Sir.
I have to say I've been negligent on your show because I've been watching the YouTube version of the Comedy Channel, otherwise known as the Guam Legislature.
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
as they're debating on whether to move Amanda's bill to the end of the agenda, they have a kerfuffle and want to take different votes on it. So they have the video camera of the whole floor, and they're trying to get enough people to raise their hands to move the legislative filing or whatever. They're not quite getting the votes. And then all of a sudden the camera goes on to view just only Clint Rigel. And then by raise of hands, not by ayes or nays, they have enough votes, but we don't get to see who raised their hands to acquire those votes.
I see.
Is that normal procedure for the legislature, or is maybe they're controlling a little bit of what we don't want to see or what we need to see?
I'm not familiar with the AV guys now, but the AV guys are kind of, in a sense, at least is my understanding, are not governed by the political whims of the majority. Their job is to put out a good broadcast. So not showing the vote by raising of hands, I think probably would have to be characterized as negligent rather than on purpose. But that's just my conjecture, Sam.
Well, maybe if anybody has the time or the willpower to sit through more time than I have, we can see whether it's a reoccurring event or if it was just a fluke of nature on that one raise of hand vote.
Good idea. We have to keep a close eye on them because, you know, I don't watch them as much as I should. I know people that do, and we catch them from time to time in doing stuff that they really shouldn't do, but try to do it because they can get away with it. And this could be one of those.
That looked pretty obvious to me because they didn't have the votes to begin with as they showed the full hand signals. And then lo and behold, once they changed the camera view, you could hear the audio counting the hands, and they had the magic number 8 ball.
Mm. So
then it went back to the full floor.
So they moved Shelton's bill to the end of the agenda or off the agenda?
To the end of the day's agenda because she's waiting on legal summation or legal conference, whatever, to give Miss Lou the power.
She ought to just listen to Tall Tales and she'd know the answer already, Sam.
Yeah, well, you would think, but more power to Tall Tales.
There you go. Thanks for calling, Sam.